Hello, everyone. I first want to thank ATARC for asking the Defense Information Systems Agency to participate in today's virtual conference. I will say this is a timely topic. That is the role of emerging technology in the Federal Emergency Response Mission. I'm joined today by Steve Wallace, our Systems Innovation Scientist and Emerging Technology Director.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having us today. Looking forward to the discussion.
As we look back on the past 3 months, those of us in the IT and cybersecurity business for the Department of Defense have seen an increase in activity in direct response to increased maximum telework. The Office of the DoD CIO recently indicated that the department went from about 95,000 remote workers to just over 1 million in the window of about 2 months. DISA directly enabled much of that increased telework capability. Our DISA director, Vice Admiral Nancy Norton, often reminds us that DISA never stopped working. We just work differently. In fact, due to the need to help the Department of Defense increase its capability to telework, DISA not only continued with its existing mission to support the combatant commands, it actually increased its workload. Was there a role for emerging technology in the federal emergency response? Absolutely. I will also say, though, that there was also a key role for tried and true technology that already existed, which we will touch upon later in the session. As we know, innovation is not only finding a new capability to solve a problem, it's also using an existing capability to solve a new problem. If there is one takeaway from today's session, one could argue that, in retrospect, DISA was purpose-built for this pandemic. Not only did DISA already have 90% of its workforce already prepared to telework, it also had several efforts underway to allow this mass telework for the entire Department of Defense. There are a few notable cases where, as the demand for remote access increased, I found myself thinking, I'm glad we already had that underway. Two easy examples are cloud-based internet isolation and remote access virtual private networks. One of the principles of DevOps is bringing the right people together to flatten the communications and reduce friction. This pandemic has given the Department of Defense the opportunity to work closely together and rapidly get after problems. Although folks are not physically sitting around the same table and whiteboard, they are actually accomplishing this virtually. In many ways, ironically, with the travel restrictions in place, we are actually working more closely with our mission partners than ever before. This virtual conference is yet another example of how we are adapting and making progress despite the travel limitations. Okay, let's now transition to the discussion with Steve Wallace on what DISA has been doing from a technological perspective to respond to the requirements of mass telework by the Department of Defense. Let's start with one of the two areas that I mentioned in my opening remarks. What is remote access virtual private networks, other known as RAVPN, and how did this come about that it happened to be available when we needed it?
The RAVPN capability is something that's actually been part of JRSS for many years, since it was founded, and but it's really just caught its legs in recent months because of the pandemic. We've actually seen a 15 times increase in the utilization since the beginning of March, which has been really for any system, 15x increase is a dramatic increase, and we're seeing benefits across the board. We're actually seeing organizations who weren't previously on JRSS now wanting to come to JRSS because of this capability. It's really truly helped us bring the workforce and make them more mobile and deliver the capabilities to them.
Now you threw in another acronym in there, or a couple of letters squished together, JRSS. What is JRSS?
Sure. You know, we in the department, we love our acronyms, and JRSS stands for the Joint Regional Security Stack. And it's a capability that's now been around for several years, and it really it grew out of a need to standardize the security stacks that were already in the field across the department. So it allows us to take, very disparate capabilities, bring them together under a common foundation, in a multi-tenant environment as well. So it's not one JRSS stack per tenant or per organization, but it's one stack for the department as a whole, and frankly, a series of stacks that are regionally placed around the country and around the world. So it gives us a whole plethora of capabilities in this one set of security devices.
Steve, let's transition to emerging technology for the department. What is cloud-based internet isolation, and why did it become so popular overnight? What were some of the conditions that led to its use to solve the bandwidth challenges for the Department of Defense?
So CBII stands for Cloud-Based Internet Isolation, and the idea here is to move the browsing off of the endpoint and out to a commercial provider outside of the DoDN, outside of NIPRNet. And it's an idea that we started, a space we started looking at back in 2017. And in April of 2019, we launched a prototype where we took two vendors and we were trying to bake them off against one another to see, it's frankly still a maturing space. So we didn't want to just go and select something based on the testing we were able to do within a lab. We wanted a broad set of test cases across the department. So we set out down this road, and over the last year, we've onboarded a number of customers and onboarded customers, and really it's been a lot of testers. And, DISA itself jumped in with our 15,000 users approximately. So we jumped in with our users and we started seeing the benefits right away of, from the security side, because a lot of that source code and a lot of the page data is not coming down to the browser. So a lot of the exploits never make their way to the browser. They're kept outside. A lot of the file downloads, we ourselves have seen about a 70% reduction in documents that are actually downloaded to the endpoint. So what happens is when a user clicks on a document, it's not downloaded to the endpoint, it's remotely rendered. So if you remember a few years ago, the hot exploit was embedding macros and embedding code in the certain document formats. This places it out there, and if the user wants to download it, they can actually download a safe regenerated copy of that file. So we've seen dramatic drop in the amount of things that are actually even downloaded to the endpoint. We've also seen between a 20 to 40% reduction in bandwidth alone, bandwidth utilization. So better use of existing bandwidth. Now take that into account with, we just talked about VPNs a moment ago, and, we saw a dramatic rise in the use of VPNs across the department, not just the RA VPN, but the VPNs across the entire department. And we saw the stress that was instantly placed on that infrastructure. So what we did with CBII is we saw the value in taking that traffic and moving that out to taking that capability and moving that out to other mission partners. So we've had a number of mission partners jump on, and they've really come full bore. Several of them, they've really jumped in with both feet, and they are seeing a dramatic reduction in the number of threats that are reaching the endpoint. So they're not getting as many alerts from the actual endpoints themselves. They're seeing a reduction in bandwidth. I know ourselves at DISA, we saw a 49% reduction in the bandwidth utilization of our VPNs because we were able to route this traffic rather than bringing it back in through the VPN just to come out across the internet. We send that directly to the CBII provider, thus offloading it from the VPN, providing the user a better user experience, but we have the same level of security that we had before when we were using CBII internally, while giving the user a better experience, offloading that traffic, and a dramatically better security posture than what we had, without CBII. So it's really been an incredible thing. And so we've now got mission partners lined up, and we're in the process right now of working towards our production contract where we can start bringing large number of users. And I think right now we're somewhere total at about 85,000 users across the board. But in order to make that next leap and to bring the larger organizations on, we've got to get to a production contract. So we're really excited about that. So within the next month or so, we expect to have that awarded and be onboarding new users.
No, that sounds like great news, Steve. And in fact, from what I hear, from my personal experience, the actual performance has increased for those that have transitioned to the cloud-based internet isolation because of the bandwidth reduction requirements, as well as, as you've said, increased security. So increased capability with increased security sounds like a win-win with this emerging technology for the Department of Defense. As we grew from, a small teleworking footprint to a large teleworking footprint, we did have to increase across the department the infrastructure as well as security. And so this kind of fits in both worlds of helping with optimize the network for the increased telework community and then increased security for those that transition to this. But along the lines of increased infrastructure requirements for the department, can we talk a little bit about, the infamous, internet access points that people hear about? What did we do with the IAPs, and any discussion that you may want to share about that or anything related to that?
Sure. So there's a few components in that area. So first, we'll start with the internet access points themselves, and so now, we when we were a workforce that was mainly on the inside, natively on NIPRNet, our traffic was mainly outbound. But now we actually have, through the use of VPNs, we have a lot of traffic inbound and outbound, both at the same time. So we had already had some plans on the books, but in response to the pandemic, we dramatically accelerated some of them. We were able to initially increase the capacity at the internet access points by about 50%, and we expect that to double from its original amount within approximately the next month to month and a half. So we'll have dramatically, increased our throughput and capacity there around the world, not just in CONUS, but across the globe. And then when we talk about our cloud access points, which are reasonably new, we've had them for a few years now, but we're actually moving to our third generation of cloud access points. So our first generation was really an adaptation of a capability that we already had, and it wasn't optimized for cloud access, that kind of thing. So we moved to our second generation of the cloud access points approximately 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years ago this summer, actually, and now we are preparing and we are making the move right now to the third generation of our cloud access points. And the big change here between the second and the third generation is the second generation was 10 gig in throughput, and we had two of those, and we are moving to 100 gigs of throughput. And when we're done, not in the next month, but we'll in the next month we'll have stood up two. But when we're completely done with the deployment of the third generation, we will have four positioned around CONUS, and then also looking at locations OCONUS as well. But and even beyond that, we were starting prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic has really reinforced the consideration that the perimeter itself needs to change. And for decades now, we've had this thing that this bubble that was NIPRNet, and there were few connections in and out. But the reality is the workforce is changing as more of us are working from home now, and we need to reconsider the way that we treat NIPRNet and the access to it. So, we talked a little bit about VPNs, but there's other technologies that are up and coming. They used to be called cloud access service brokers. Now they're called SASE. These new capabilities that are coming out that allow users, rather than coming in via VPN just to go out to go to another service, allows us to make more dynamic routing decisions and better decisions while protecting the endpoint and the data. But as our data sort of spreads outside of what's traditionally been NIPRNet, it affords us some additional opportunities.
Just a real quick qualifier, when you say we increased the capacity of the internet access points, we really are talking about the ones that DISA controls.
That is correct. Yes, we control 10 internet access points around the world, CONUS as well as OCONUS.
Well, thanks for that. I think so we've done stuff with JRSS, which was actually effort that already existed that we just ramped up. We talked about cloud-based internet isolation, which is an emerging technology. But the internet access points, those were actually one of those efforts underway that I had mentioned at the opening remarks, and that was we had already been in the process of upgrading those internet access points around the world, as well as moving to a third generation BCAP. So those are examples of efforts underway that with the onset of COVID-19 and the federal response, that was one of those instances where I said, hey, I'm glad we were already doing something about that because it was good timing. Let's change gears and talk about collaboration tools. So we've talked about the infrastructure, we talked about increasing security to some degree, but we had to put stuff in the hands of users so that they can work more optimally remotely. And so what has DISA and the DoD done to increase collaboration in a remote workforce construct?
Sure. So, one of the first things we worked with other parts of the department to stand up the CVR capability. So we worked a number of the tasks behind the scenes to help the department get CVR stood up, which has been just a great success and has shown us as well as others, how well we can work together remotely. So there's been a lot of good to come out of that. But at the same time, some of our traditional tools, the Defense Collaboration Service, DCS, just before things really ramped up in terms of remote work, but we saw it was coming. We doubled the capacity of our DCS system, and actually, once people went into that mass telework mode, we saw about a 6-fold increase in the number of concurrent users that we had in our DCS collaboration sessions, so the conferences, as well as in chat. We saw a dramatic increase and a dramatic shift, towards these tools, which is really, good to see. So, some of the new things with CVR, new capabilities, but then some of our more traditional capabilities as well, getting exercised and really used well.
You mentioned CVR, commercial virtual remote. What is CVR?
Sure. So there I went with the acronyms again, but CVR is a commercial capability that gives us access to a wide variety of collaboration tools that we didn't have previously, and it allows us to see what's available commercially and sort of those capabilities. So now we're truly able to collaborate across the entire department user base, and using intermingled tools in ways that weren't previously possible. So we've seen a dramatic take rate. A number of users, a large number of users from around the department are using CVR as part of their daily business. So it's really proved useful.
So could you also elaborate on other collaboration tools that we may have already had in place? I'm thinking of MilDrive as one of the capabilities that we already have that we were able to deploy to the enterprise. And what is MilDrive and how does that work?
Sure. So MilDrive it's a cloud-based storage capability, and we've been testing it internally now for probably 6 months or more. And frankly, I live by it at this point. And I've taken all of my files and I upload them to MilDrive, and now it doesn't matter what platform I'm on. If I'm on my mobile device, if I'm on my my desktop, if my desktop dies, I've got everything there. So that I can at any moment, I have access to my data on the run or whether I'm sitting still. It was originally a capability that we had just rolled out in the unclassified environment, but in response to the pandemic, the team stepped up and deployed a capability, on the classified network now as well. So that's just getting started, and we've got several hundred users on it at this point. But that's proving useful too, because it's allowed us to, as we're deploying more remote classified capabilities, it's allowing those users that are using those capabilities to have access to the same data that they had when they were on-prem. So you really get a truly mobile workforce, whether I am, in my office or working remotely, regardless of the classification. Now I can have access to my data.
That's outstanding. I use it personally, and I know that It's the only thing that I use, and so maybe a little plug there for MilDrive. We've talked about infrastructure. We've talked a little bit about emerging technology. We've talked a little bit about collaboration tools, and all in response to supporting the federal response here. We know that DISA does a whole lot more than that. Could you give me an example of how DISA is using proven capabilities to directly enable the COVID-19 response that others may not be tracking?
Sure. So probably one of the best examples is the work that we did during the repositioning of the Mercy and the Comfort. And, I remember in my office working and I had the TV on while the pandemic was taking off, and watching those ships and thinking about the work that our folks were doing to help enable those once they got not only when they got to their destination, but before they left as well. We were working with a lot of the organizations on the coordination to help them set sail. But even once they arrived, providing communications and providing capabilities to the folks on board those ships in order to help them help the cities that they were, repositioning to was really, we were really able to see firsthand, the difference that all of us can make in the work that we do. And we may not necessarily see it, but that was a really prime example right in front of us all of the work that we were able to do.
Yeah, no doubt. There are a lot of folks that helped, but DISA's small part in that was to ensure that we had connectivity to those ships so that they can do what they needed to do once in dock. Hey, well, Steve, thank you for sharing this event with me, and thank you to ATARC for inviting DISA to participate in today's virtual conference.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for having me, and thanks to everyone at the conference. Appreciate your time.
That's all correct, right? Alrighty, it looks like we're got our panelists on board and we are ready to go. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining ATARC's virtual conference. I am Brandy Vincent, a journalist who covers the intersection of the government and emerging technology at NextGov. Welcome to our panel, which will deeply hone in on application development and security amid the pandemic and beyond it. Here's how it's going to go down. I'm first going to introduce each of our panelists, and as I do, they're going to take about 3 to 5 minutes to share overviews of their work and kind of what they're experiencing right now. From there, I'm going to ask them some of my own questions, and then for the last 10 to 15 minutes, our panelists are going to answer some of your questions, so be sure to be adding them on the chat as we go. So with all that being said, we're going to go ahead and get started. First, I'd love to introduce Jennifer Dostal, who is the Assistant Director of the Office of Information Management at the Environment and Natural Resources Division of the U.S. Department of Justice. OIM is responsible for a wide range of personnel and case management applications, as well as ENRD's intranet and public website. As Scrum Master, Jennifer is increasing her team's agility and their transition to continuous integration and delivery. And previously, she worked as a federal IT specialist at the Peace Corps and the National Center for Health Statistics. So welcome so much, Jennifer. Thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've seen since you started in January, which, wow, what a crazy time to start, and how the crisis has sort of motivated your team to boost its agile approach. Guys, I'm not getting audio on my computer.
I'm sorry, I muted myself. I've just fixed it. I'm so sorry.
All right.
So many ways to mute myself. Thank you, Brandy. It's been an exciting and transformative time at ENRD. OIM definitely had plans to be more agile, including recasting my position as a project manager Scrum Master We also hired a UX designer and a business analyst tester in January. But the work from home situation really allowed our agile practices to flourish and to really feel the benefits in the team. I especially felt my team take to the daily scrum. They started using it as a chance to check in with everyone, note connection and network difficulties, and it really helped us stay connected and motivated throughout the situation. Our previous culture had been for a developer to design, develop, and test an application almost completely by themselves. And by tackling the smaller immediate issues that evolved from the work from home situation, we were able to transition to a more team-oriented culture where we discussed the issues, documented the approach and the backlog item, worked together to get it done, and tested it before we delivered it to end users. We also added an additional team member whose workload was reduced from his original position because of the pandemic. And it really pushed us to be more intentional with our meetings, have good discussions, and get everyone on the same page using any means available: cell phones, FaceTime, Skype, GoToMeeting, whatever we could would use. And when I started in February, it felt like we were making a gradual turn towards a more structured approach to Scrum. But with the work from home situation, we really needed the structure and the rhythm of a more intentional approach with sprints to hit a comfortable stride and to be delivering software reliably, regularly. We've absorbed a lot of new changes and keeping with an agile approach of valuing people and working software and progress over perfection. It's really allowed us to thrive in this tough situation. And I'm immensely proud of the dedication and perseverance my team has shown throughout all of this. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Jennifer. And I'm really excited to dive a little bit deeper into what that looks like in just a few. Next, I am so excited to introduce Raven Manuel, who serves as the Senior Application Developer and Application Architect and DevOps Engineer for the National Museum of African American History and Culture. She is an Army veteran who transitioned into IT almost 20 years ago. Raven told me that she approaches DevOps from the practical perspective of a system architect with the tactical experience of a software engineer. The DevOps strategy of her organization follows and builds in flexibility to accommodate lessons learned, adaptability, to be reflexively responsive, and it focuses on continuous incremental processes improvement and endeavors to be future focused, always planning for the inevitable technology migration. So Raven, talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in the pandemic. And also to my panelists, make sure that you're muted on the other side. I'm getting just a little bit of feedback. How do you, Raven?
I believe I'm muted.
Nope, you are good to go.
Hopefully. Is that good?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, Brandy, and wonderful introduction. Thank you. My unit, the Museum of African American History and Culture, the digital production and delivery, development delivery team, we're a myriad of mix-up of federal staff, which is very small. It's myself, my coworker who is a UX accessibility person, and a SharePoint developer. That means that when we make digital products and our product portfolio, it's usually we have consultants and contractors that assist us with the development and the delivery. We also leverage the enterprise IT, the Office of the CIO, OCIO. So everybody is part of that DevOps team. When the pandemic happened, it didn't really impact us that much. We were already working much remote. So internally, we're an agile shop. So words like backlog, scrum, sprint, that was already part of our vernacular. So there was really nothing more for us to get used to. I find that while we worked remotely, when it came to demos or getting feedback, it was in a conference room. They were able to look at us and give us their feedback. And that has been a challenge because that can't happen. So learning how to use Zoom and MS Teams to be able to go to the right places to find the documents has been a challenge for our stakeholders, whereas it's not been that much for us internally. For myself, as the person who has developed the DevOps strategy, it's made as a framework so that it's project based. It's references to a project. So if a project is small, we don't use all the pieces of the DevOps strategy for the development, for mostly for delivery. We don't need to use a lot of automation, and we don't need to use a lot of tools. If it's larger, then we tend to do more tools and more development. Just a lot of different complexities with that. And we only have one staple sort of product in our portfolio, which is our main website, because everything else is based off of need. So for instance, the new portal that was produced recently talking about race, that was something that there was a need for that. It had to be fast. So implementing the DevOps strategy couldn't be something that tied it down to make it be so that it couldn't be launched on time, because it needed to be timely. So it's really kind of exciting the way DevOps works within our organization, because we have to leverage everyone, and our DevOps strategy has to be flexible. Our main website's on Drupal, so it's going to transition because it's becoming deprecated. So when we do DevOps, it has to be flexible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raven. And I'm excited to follow up on some of that as well.
Welcome.
Next, we have Simmons Lowe, tech lead at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. He works in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer and is responsible for software delivery and operations for the revenue collection system at USPTO. Simmons, the recently passed CARES Act required some software changes to your system, right? Why don't you tell us about what you're enduring right now at USPTO?
Yeah, thanks, Brandy. You can hear me, right?
Yeah, I can.
All right, awesome. Hey, everyone. Simmons Lowe, as Brandy mentioned, I'm broadcasting from Alexandria, Virginia. It just stopped raining. Hopefully you all are getting some sun in your neck of the woods as well. Yeah, I am the tech lead for the system at USPTO that collects the revenue. We call it FP&G internally, stands for Fee Processing Next Generation. At a super high level workflow, the way it works for the global world, when they want to submit a patent or a trademark application, they have to, submit upload the application material, whether it's the patent diagrams or whatever, and then they have to pay a fee. Some of you may know this, but USPTO is completely fee funded, so doesn't bring in revenue from from Congress or the taxpayer in the typical sense, but is rather from the fees that we collect for the goods and services that we provide around the world. And those fees, right, can impact or sometimes they're sizable fees depending on the situation. But that was one of the changes that happened with the CARES Act, was that, I guess that was passed 2.5-3 months ago. As part of that, there were some provisions or some line items in there that gave the director of the Patent and Trademark Office the ability to reduce some fees to provide relief for U.S. citizens, right? And so this would enable U.S. citizens to be able to certify or attest that they were in fact financially impacted by COVID, whether it's transportation or health, or their office was closed. And then we had business logic in our system, FP&G, that needed to change to ultimately reduce those fees or give people the ability to pay for a sort of scaled out or moved to the right. And that wasn't really that scary for us, right? Congress changes this law, it gets signed, but we do those quick changes every day. So it wasn't like this was some sort of mad dash sort of thing. Literally, a law was changed, and then maybe 24 hours later, we had written the code and it was in production. I hear a lot of people asking, or maybe do some calculations of like, how does fees or how does doing DevOps save money, or how does it help? And typically it's with the commercial organizations. I just think in the federal government, it's almost needed for us to even to be able to respond to compliance and be able to respond to, frankly, laws changes in a quick manner.
That's great. I'm excited too to hear more about that. Last, but certainly not least, we have Stephanie Taylor, who is currently the manager of application security compliance and reporting at the FAA, where she provides analysis on the impact of DevSecOps, a word that's going to be coming up a lot, maturity on reduction in POA&Ms and vulnerabilities. Prior to this role, she was the manager of solutions design and development, where she managed the FAA's DevOps engineers and oversaw the development and migration of applications in the cloud. Also, Stephanie will soon be going through a transition into the FAA's federal cloud service, where she will act as FAA's cloud strategist, tasked with developing a strategy to significantly reduce the FAA's data center footprint and expedite software release cycles by 2025. Stephanie, what sort of impacts were y'all seeing from application development before and now during the pandemic?
So, much like Raven, we were pretty much a very mobile workforce at the FAA. So we haven't really seen a lot of impact to our application development during the pandemic. What we did note is that we became, a little more heavily dependent on on tools like Slack, because people would not always be on their GFE, people had connectivity issues. So Slack was a way that we could always communicate with someone if we needed to get in touch with someone quickly. Early on, right when the max telework started at the FAA, we had some network issues. So FTI had to upgrade both our WAN and internet bandwidth. So that impacted us for a few days, but they quickly addressed that. And since then, we really haven't had any impact from the pandemic on our application development. So
that's great.
But I did want to talk a little bit about our application development evolution through our DevOps implementation, which we've been on this journey now for about 4 years now. So at the FAA, our tool chain consists of Terraform, Bitbucket, Artifactory, Jenkins, and Ansible Tower. We also use OpenShift and Pivotal for our container solution. But 100% of our AWS instances have been provisioned through infrastructure as code using Terraform. And more than 80% of our application deployments to the cloud are also automated. So during our DevOps implementation, the biggest impact that we have seen since our DevOps implementation is that software releases are far more consistent and reliable. We have established a set of core playbooks for installation and configuration of our most common infrastructure and tools. We also have a set of template playbooks that we make available to our dev teams so that they can quick start their automation on our most common platforms, be that Java, Tomcat, .NET, Node.js, or whatever that is. And then the thing is, all of these artifacts are available via self-service in our repository. So anyone can do a pull request, they can make a modification to them, and they can submit them for peer review. The biggest challenge we've seen with our DevOps implementation is getting the sec in DevSecOps. We transitioned to saying DevSecOps about a year ago in hopes of getting security to the table so that they understand that we cannot be successful without their input. We've certainly made some progress with security automation. We have things like patching playbooks to deploy security patches and hot fixes. We use Packer to automate the provision of fully hardened base images in both the AWS, GCC, and public, as well as Azure. And we also have integrated both SonarQube and FOD automated scans into our pipeline. Yet we still have a lot of challenges where we're constantly being dinged for security controls that have not been met. But in large part, we are unaware of those controls because our security requirements are not fully documented and widely available in a place that's accessible to everyone who needs to automate them. The other thing that's really hard is scanning. So scanning for us right now is a challenge. The tools that we've integrated into our pipeline are not the same tools that our vulnerability branch uses for the manual scan. So obviously, it's hard to get to continuous ATO when you don't have a common set of tools. So we are in discussions to try and get to a common set of tools. We're looking at things like Tenable, but right now there are just so many challenges around that. The last thing I will mention is another challenge that we had, which I'm sure is not unique to the FAA, is migrating legacy applications to the cloud. So while new development applications that are being newly developed in the cloud have been largely successful through our DevOps pipeline, migrating our legacy applications or getting our legacy applications onto our tool chain has been extremely challenging as we deal with licensing issues, security constraints, and just too much technical debt. So initially there was this big push to get as many applications onto the cloud as possible by any means necessary. It was all about reducing our footprint in the data center. But as you saw OMB shift from cloud first to cloud smart, we've been able to, take a step back and make our cloud adoption more qualitative than quantitative. So this has enabled us to focus more on business drivers and analyzing our application portfolio, things like that. So like you mentioned, I'm transitioning into a new role as the FAA's cloud strategist. And one of my first responsibilities there will be to stand up a cloud center of excellence. And so I hope in doing that we'll be able to establish better governance, increase our knowledge base and foster better communication and collaboration throughout the FAA. So again, thank you for your time. And that's all I have.
Well, thank you so much. Definitely going to follow up on some of the cloud. And I was just told, I think we've had one more panelist join. Dennis, are you on the line over the phone?
I am. I'm over the phone. Is that okay?
That is A-okay, guys. Let me go ahead and introduce Dennis for you. He is another Army vet on our panel, and he now serves as the assistant lead for the Internal Revenue Service DevOps Federal Interagency Council, that's the DFIC, and brings over 10 years of management and analysis experience to the IRS. He's the Scrum Master for the IRS DevOps Standard Stack project, and he also told me he's involved with the ATARC Application Development, Continuous Integration, Continuous Delivery, measuring DevOps transformation, and managing performance working groups. Prior to the IRS, as I mentioned, he served in the U.S. Army and as a Department of Defense civilian. Thank you so much for joining us, Dennis. How's it going for you guys at IRS amid the pandemic?
It's going. We've learned how to make teleworking work for us. That's for sure. We're able to do our function in the IT world probably just as smoothly from the teleconferencing and work from home as we are in a building. So we're definitely learning from what's going on right now. And I want to go into Standard Stack a little bit. Our function there is to primarily serve as a process to bring new technologies and commercial off-the-shelf products to the IRS. And we do that through the DevOps division, assisting in server configuration and infrastructure as code. Anytime that you're looking to incorporate new technologies, you really want to address the area of acquisitions as well, because you want to talk about cost. And when you're talking about cost, it's not only the purchase price of these technologies, but it's also the fees that are associated, like licensing, intellectual property, legal fees that accompany the purchase. We operate from the agile management philosophy during operations. So we do host a sprint schedule, with each sprint running in a 2-week period. And then we host Scrum meetings on a daily and then sometimes just weekly basis, depending on what team you're on. Many of our organizations are looking to purchase commercial off-the-shelf products from technology companies as opposed to developing them in-house. This is really because the COTS purchases provide an immediate opportunity for usage, whereas sometimes the in-house development can be time-consuming and maybe not as efficient and effective as the already tested COTS product. The IRS is definitely a good example of one that acquires COTS technologies. We have purchase agreements for a few developers such as Microsoft, Red Hat, Oracle. We've been able to successfully deploy things like Windows, WinOS 2012, Oracle Fusion Middleware, and JBoss and other technologies. What we go into, though, is once the decisions that are made for purchasing the technology or the platform, you want to look at the areas for which your platform or new technology may be at risk. It's really recommended to go ahead and put these products to a test to check the reliability and safety of your new purchases. So one thing that we're looking really into is using things to prevent hackers and to things that could compromise your accounts or your data. And this isn't new. It's just something that we reinforce. Things like creating stronger and complex passwords, access your data from a trusted device, review your organization's website frequently, monitoring your own data, and be cognizant of any transfers of data to other organizations as well. Limit the access that you have to your information to only people that may need to know. And if you can, use areas of encryption for messages of importance and whatnot. So it's standard stack. These are principles that we try to put into place when we're doing server configurations and infrastructure as code. So it's going pretty well so far, and we're hoping that we'll see how things progress in the next few months with the COVID-19 situation, and people are going to be going back to the buildings or doing a mixture of teleworking or teleworking, more than being in the actual physical building. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you, Dennis. And I will start with you for our questions, which we're now going into. Going to remind the audience one more time to be submitting yours, because in the last 15 minutes, I will be taking them. But Dennis, you mentioned commercial off-the-shelf products. Did you see a spike in you guys using those during the pandemic, or a spike in the need for them? And how do you manage security with those introductions?
We've had a lot of good discussions. Because anytime you're dealing with new technologies, you want to see what the private sector has to offer. Many times or not, they might be ahead of the power curve in their products. So the discussions on that has increased, I think, because we've had a chance during this pandemic to kind of sit back a little bit and to analyze our own functions and tool sets. So we haven't really put together any new purchase agreements, so to speak, because there is a level of levels of management you have to go through if you're looking for a new tool or whatnot. And we're always keep in mind our budget constraints as well. We all have to deal with a fiscal year budget. So that's something that may separate a lot of us from our government agencies from the private sector. We can't just go out and buy any new and greatest latest tool unless we know it's going to be providing us the function that we need and then have a justification for it.
Absolutely.
So hopefully that answers your question.
It does. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to stick a little bit on this topic of security. I'm going to jump now over to Raven, who gave me some really interesting insights that I want her to unpack ahead of this. Raven, I want you to share with our audience your viewpoint on terms like DevSecOps and all the dev word ops that are emerging out there. Relatedly, but to dive a little bit deeper into that, how do you recommend that federal officials inform their management of the inherent security components in DevOps when endeavoring to get their buy-in to proceed, especially in agencies with security critical environments?
That is a, what do you call that when you stand on your little soapbox? That's one of the things, is when you come up with marketing terms. And I have to be honest, I had an answer. I was thinking about this, and then I saw the opening speech with Nick and some of Tracy's earlier, what they said. And I realized, because it relates to the second question, you say what you have to say in order to get buy-in. Okay, that's pretty much what has to happen. I personally don't use DevSec or Dev anything ops. It's DevOps, because the thing that I don't want to, as an evangelist, is for people to think that security is not part of DevOps. It's supposed to be, because ops has security built in. And the way we at the museum, the way we do it is it's in testing. So when we test, even from unit tests to integration tests to system testing, we add in security. And for me, I believe that DevOps, when you focus on security, makes it more secure aware. So for the organizations like DoD, because most people look at the DoD as the standard for security, they say DevSecOps because I think it was Tracy who actually said it. It's you want to make sure that the management understands that security is going to be built in. So when you're trying to get buy-in, you actually add that in there. Nick said GitOps, and I was like, what? I was like, come on, we can't have GitHub to have its own operational term. But I guess you say what you say and you say it internally. My whole thing is I'll stamp my foot down and say, we just can't do DevNet sec you just can't do all those things. But to get buy-in, one of the things I am convinced is that you don't have to get buy-in from quote unquote the top. You get buy-in from as high as you need to get buy-in. That is what I did. I didn't have to go to the director of the museum to be able to go to get, to be able to move forward with DevOps. I went to the director of operations to get, and she was very supportive, which my manager was supportive. And so you go one level up, get the buy-in, and then everybody below will actually buy in as long as you go up as far. I made the mistake, and even though the word wasn't in there, it was Dev Tools Ops is what it would have been if I had made my own word, because I focused on tools, which that later bit me in the butt, caused a little bit of misunderstanding, so that in the end, the management team expected that DevOps was now going to be a project plan. That hurt my soul because I actually sowed that seed that DevOps could actually be a project plan, and had to just. Thankfully, other things happened and we had to slow that down. So I am not a person that likes those little middle words at all. It's DevOps. DevOps means everything. And if you need to use the word DevSecOps in your organization, please do. Just don't use it around me.
Well, you raise really good points.
That's it. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, thank you. You raised really good points around buy-in. I was wondering if any of our other panelists, if you could maybe flag me, do you have anything to share about sort of things that you've learned about getting buy-in from the top in these sort of efforts? We got crickets.
I'm not flagged, but this is Simmons. I can address that. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
Yeah, so this was, I guess, coming on 4 or 5 years for us at the Patent and Trademark Office, but we did need pretty high-level executive buy-in. And the reason we needed that high-level buy-in, and I was probably going to talk about this a little later, but I'll mention it now, is typically the way government IT shops are organized, and you see this all over the city, all over Washington, D.C., is that they're organized by cost centers. And it's very sort of 1995 thinking, where you've got a development department, a test department, a security department, a project management department, a operations department, a performance testing department, and these departments go on and on and on. And I believe the way that DevOps needs to be done correctly, or probably a step that needs to be taken in order to get there, is to organize your team around a product. You organize around the thing that is providing business value. And the reason that we needed, at least in the Patent and Trademark Office, that executive buy-in is that I needed approval effectively to be able to get through the different stage gates that those 20 different departments typically do in the federal government, right? Instead of asking for approval from the security group, or asking for approval from the testing group or the operations group, or you all have heard about CABs and ITSM and CRQs. Most, if not all of that, has to go away with DevOps or DevSecOps. And so we did need we did need that high level buy-in to be able to, frankly, to have a piece of paper to say, hey, we have the authority and we have the authority to do it differently, and we as a product team are making the decisions for our customers, not through 20 different, getting approval from 20 different groups. Now, maybe if you're a smaller organization, maybe you don't quite have that, but most government agencies I go to, you'll see a lot of them organized that way, and yeah, a lot of bureaucracy.
Totally. It's helpful
This is
insight.
Brandy, if
Stephanie, would you
I
like
wanted
to add?
to,
Yeah, I was gonna,
yes.
go ahead, Raven, if you have a follow-up on that.
No, no, no,
Okay,
go
so
for it.
I was gonna say the same as Simmons, that at the FAA, we really needed not only executive buy-in, but make sure that we had the right level of collaboration. So for DevOps adoption, because number one, when the FAA was doing DevOps at the same time that they were adopting cloud, and at the highest level, it was all about, we've made this large investment in cloud, and they wanted to see some benefit on that. And how they interpreted benefit on that was, we want to see data centers close. We've made all this investment in cloud. Start moving the applications up right away, start closing all of these data centers that we have. The issue with that was, when things were done siloed and you didn't have it at the top, when we first got our cloud, we didn't, we had done a broker model. So we didn't have API access to put a tool chain into the cloud. We didn't have console access. We didn't have anything. We had this broker model where they were first trying to use agility, and then they were trying to use cloud forms. And when you're trying to deploy applications at a pace where automation is going to be critical to even, halfway meet that pace, you need that buy-in. And so what happened is, when we got our cloud first, all we had was infrastructure as a service. We did not have any PaaS offerings. We did not have RDS. We did not have anything, but they were expecting us to put applications in the cloud. And that was because decisions weren't made, and buy-in wasn't given at a high enough level to trickle down what the priorities could and should be. And so once we made that argument and we got DevOps, it was, they didn't understand the challenges that we had of getting the tool chain stood up in the cloud when we didn't even have API access to the cloud to get the tool chain stood up. So then it was, well, DevOps is holding us back. DevOps is slowing down our cloud adoption, and we needed to make that case that, actually, if you let us do this upfront investment, we will see the benefits on the back end. So otherwise, DevOps would have been shut down early on if we couldn't make that case to our senior leadership. So because they were just thinking, DevOps is slowing everything down. So in a large organization, which we have, it was critical that we do that.
Yeah, and you raised really good points. On top of what you had mentioned earlier in your intro about releasing resources to get more people on board, and then kind of approaching leadership in this way, how long did it take for them to sort of see the impact of the approach that you were pitching and say, okay, we see now that this was the right way to go? Has that happened? And what was kind of the timeline on that?
Well, there's a whole lot of isolated things. Number one, right? So having a lot of things in the cloud, and considering how the cost structure in the cloud is different than what it is on premise. When we had the furlough, just the fact that things in the cloud that were deployed through DevOps, we could shut those things down while furlough was happening. And then when furlough came back on, we were able to take those things up instantly and not incur those costs during those couple of weeks of furlough, or several weeks of furlough, however long it was. So that was something that we demonstrated to the agency. Just when you look at the release, we've had recently integrating scanning into our tool chain, we've had systems get to our vulnerability branch for scanning, and they're only finding like, 4 or 5 lows because we have scans built into it. Well, our vulnerability branch uses Web Inspect, but we have SonarQube. So we're finding a ton of vulnerabilities before we actually turn it over to AIS. So from a security standpoint, they've seen a reduction in the vulnerabilities as things go through. We're trying to get to a point where, as we move towards continuous ATO, that security starts looking at our playbooks. They already accept our base images. If we provision our base images in the cloud with our Packer and our repeatable processes, and we deploy our instances with our Terraform templates, then we already have gotten past a big hurdle on security because they are authorizing the playbooks and the templates rather than looking at a system by system by system. So yes, we have definitely shown some benefit.
That's awesome. I'd love to pivot now on over to Jennifer for one more question on security. You mentioned to me that previously, y'all are still very early in your DevOps journey, but you're really looking at how to skip ahead to DevSecOps. Can you explain a little bit what that means for our audience?
Okay. All right. Well, I'm just like listening to Stephanie talk about going to the cloud and the DevOps and the cloud interaction. And just sort of that situation of basically OIM is such a small team that we don't have a ton of stuff pressing in on us, but we have a lot of tasks and things that we need to do. So doing additional security scans or a lot of additional Section 508 testing, things like that, to be able to just automate those things almost immediately when we implement the DevOps pipeline, along with some project management and issue tracking software. It's really what we have to do to realize benefits from it, because to slowly build and have just regular security scans run by a security person and kind of going through that stuff, for us, it's more work that we have to take on, and we just don't have a place for it to live on our team. So we're hoping to sort of look at our testing, look at our security, and automate that stuff very soon in the process instead of letting it get fully mature as a manual process. And then, also reducing the amount of work that's on the developer so they can actually do development work as opposed to all these side tasks with accessibility and some of the security stuff. I actually think for us, the pandemic and the work from home situation, it sounds completely counterintuitive, but I think it's actually going to be our best opportunity to implement this. Just having to be creative and resourceful and getting through the smaller problems of users having trouble accessing some of the software to some of the problems that we had with our connections, and just our ability to take to the new agile processes. I think it's really given my team an attitude of being more experimental, more open to trying new things, and more tolerant of mistakes and hiccups, which is part of what we need to implement something that's this big, all at once. So that's, I'm hoping the pandemic has a silver lining. It seems terrible. I don't recommend it for anybody, but that this could be a good opportunity for us to implement this and to jump ahead in our DevSecOps journey.
That's great. And I mean, it's good. I think it's important to try to find silver linings or things that we're instilling now that we want to see carry on beyond the pandemic, which is related to kind of the pivot I want to take now into culture. Simmons, we already started with you speaking a little bit about organizationally how all of that works, but I want you to talk to us a little bit about what were some of the greatest cultural challenges that you've seen in deploying a sort of DevOps approach with new applications, and how did those cultural challenges change or get amplified or get better amid the pandemic? After Simmons goes, if anyone else would like to follow up, I'd be happy for you guys to do that as well. So take it away, Simmons.
Yeah, so I've got this theory. I don't know if it's just me, but I've got this theory that that it's not culture that I want folks to try to improve. I hear a lot of DevOps, like DevOps is all about culture, and I think it makes me nervous to hear that in the federal government. And the reason it makes me nervous is I think execs in the federal government can say, oh yeah, I'm going to try to change the culture, kind of this soft thing, right? Like I'm going to send everyone to training or send everyone to watch Simmons in this, ATARC webinar, and think that somehow culture is magically changed. And I think it's actually what I guess my charge to everyone in the federal government is, I think it's the org chart that drives the culture. I think it's human nature that people want to be part of a team, right? And when you are the testing team, you have this natural tendency to kind of create tension with the development team. Or when you're in the operations team, you have this tendency to create tension, and it's almost like your job becomes to block or to say no. And I guess I just want to. My charge again is that we as federal government folks in ITs, that we think of ourselves as teams that are building products, and you have full end-to-end ownership of that product, and then your team and your culture is around that particular product. And I think outcomes would change a lot in IT and across the federal government. Regarding how sort of the impact of the pandemic and all of that sort of stuff, you touched on that. I hear a lot of people saying like, oh my gosh, we're so much more efficient now because we're working from home and et cetera, et cetera. And I think it is like folks doing local optimization, right? Like, man, I'm really efficient because I just walk 10 feet from my bed to my computer, and it's just so much more efficient. I think, though, what's important to look at is the actual sort of team efficiency. I know, at least on my team, we measure sort of the 5 different SDO metrics, right? Deployment frequency, lead time, uptime, MTTR, change fail rate, those things. And I can tell you, it's not anecdotal, it's not my opinion, but our metrics have been reduced in the last 3 months. Like my team flat out is not performing as well as we were 6 months ago. Now, I mean, we're still way to the right of the bell curve, but it's been hurt. Now, granted, this is not a normal work from home situation, right? I mean, there's kids running around, it's not normal. But I tend to think, I'm an agilist at heart, and one of the 12 principles of the Agile Manifesto is face-to-face communication is the most efficient. So I'm a big face-to-face, we're all in this together, team-oriented, we're in a team room, and we're getting stuff done. But we're making our best. We're doing our best. How about that?
Absolutely. That's great. And you raise a really good point that I think Raven brought up whenever she was introing herself about sort of dealing with this face-to-face virtually. We're all personally dealing with it now. I know I have more nerves for virtual panels than I do for normal panels because you don't know what's going to happen. But Raven, why don't you share a little bit more about that?
Thank you, Simmons. Actually, we would be your test case because our teams are product focused. We're not siloed. It's all about, the team is about a product. So our efficiency, when we started DevOps, it was instantaneously better once we added cloud-based hosting, like when we had cloud for our dev stage, QAT, and pre-production, because sometimes we would deploy to the to the data center and sometimes not. So our teams, we haven't seen a drop because we never really had the face-to-face. Some people are in Maryland and some people are in Alexandria, and I'm in the mountains. And so we never had the face-to-face. And I think that you brought up a very good point. When you are in a very big organization and you have an IT structure that's based off of functions and not product, then you may not benefit from this particular type of goodness that has come out of the COVID. It helped me a lot develop a better strategy. It helped me be able to look at this framework. I came up with a framework now that I want to do, and it's developed off of a design pattern. The UI has a design pattern, so it has components, and each of the components fit into each other. So our framework is a componentized framework where we have delivery and development, but on top of it, we have communication, we have security, we have administration, like all of these little things that you have to think about when you're thinking about a whole full package of the deployment CI/CD pipeline, and it's based off of a product. So I do appreciate what you've said, and I would love to talk to larger organizations because there's a disconnect in DevOps, and so DevOps might actually need to have two sides: DevOps for large organizations or IT based organizations, and DevOps for the people who can actually do it like really well, which are the small ones that are product based. Because we don't have to do it that way. So it's really interesting, the FAA and PTO, that you have to get such high buy-in. It would probably be, it's a really good thing I don't work there. That's what I'm thinking. It probably wouldn't be a career move for me because I'm not used to that. But I think that's it.
That's great. And
I think it's critical. I think that was the critical thing.
I would love to hear more. Yeah, go right ahead.
So Brandy, one of the things that I will say about culture, because I agree totally with everything that Simmons said and everything, but in terms of organization structure, our organizational structure has been a real challenge because we have development within the FAA. We have directorates, or like solutions delivery, infrastructure, security, things like that. But then within solutions delivery, where I am, we have development, and then we have operations or sustainment, and then we have something called middle tier operations, which they control deployments to pre-prod and production. Well, so when I think of culture and I think of the challenges that we've had in changing the culture to be more supportive of a DevOps environment, things like our middle tier service, they require that you deploy everything to pre-prod first, right? And then no one has access to pre-prod, you can't touch it. And then they compare things. They compare pre-prod to production, and you wait for a couple of weeks for that to happen. And then they say, okay, now we're going to deploy you to production. Well, when we have playbooks and we've used the same playbook to deploy the application to dev, we've used the same playbook to deploy the application to test. It's code, it's going to run the same way. When we think we don't need a pre-prod anymore, you know what I mean? It's a little different. So getting people to change from that aspect, that's one thing that we have internally. And then when you reach over to our other directorates outside of solutions delivery, security, getting them to like even take something, they wouldn't at first accept something that was FedRAMP. Like we'd say, okay, but this is FedRAMP. We don't know what that, we don't know that you can still use that. We have our own controls. Just because it's FedRAMP doesn't mean that you can automatically use it inside of our network. So it's getting people to adapt to those kinds of cultural changes when you embrace automation. We've sat with developers who are absolutely fearful of the fact that when they do a check-in, it's going to deploy all the way to pre-prod. We can't even get to production. Like getting to something where we're going to do a canary type deployment or a blue-green type deployment is so far away from us that we can't even see it because we have too many manual processes where no matter how much we automate, security is going to slow it down. Our change management board, right? They're willing, where anytime you want to make any kind of change, it goes through ECMB. Well, we're trying to get to a place where we say, look, we've deployed this with this version of this playbook, so that they can be assured that nothing on the configuration has changed. And then we expedite that change management process. So when I think of culture, I think about those types of changes that slow us down a lot, no matter how much we automate DevOps. So.
Yeah. That's really helpful. And I appreciate your perspective. And I also appreciate all of our other panelists nodding and laughing with it. Thank you guys all for being candid. Or so candid here. It's really great. We have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to jump on over to our audience questions. Here's the first one. We may have touched on it, but I'm going to read it out anyway. Regarding DevSecOps, how are you embedding security to move from a scan and wait process to a continuous monitoring and continuous integration that allows developers to fix vulnerabilities quicker? Does anyone want to take that? I know we touched on it a little bit.
Okay, so I have a very different situation, I think, from everyone else being in such a small organization with such a small team. And for us, we don't really have any prescribed security procedures or security scans. That stuff is handled at the network level, not as we're pushing new changes out to deploying new software. So for us, it is literally, we're building it into our system and we're thinking about, as developers, how can we help make sure that the data is secure, the applications are secure, and that we are ensuring that, you know, the continuing operation of our network as a whole. So I think we have a slightly different situation from some of these larger organizations that have a lot more overhead involved with their processes. But for us, it's not going to be much of a shift, I think. And listening to the other panelists, I am now starting to really, really appreciate that.
Hey, this is Simmons. I'll add to that if that's okay. So the way it used to work, and this may resonate with some of you in larger agencies, right, is that you would spend a month or 2 or 3 or 6 or 12 or 18 building something, and then you would fill out some sort of form, like a SharePoint form or something, and you would put in a request to a different department that would then execute some sort of security scan, right? And then maybe you'd go and you'd be in a queue or you'd be wait, and then 2 weeks, 2 months, 6 years later, you would get the results of that scan, right? That's probably very typical. Yeah, I'm seeing some thumbs up, right? That's probably very typical. And it's not just the federal government, it's large organizations, folks. This is normal across the globe. For large organizations. And what we did, at least at the Patent and Trademark Office, is that we now have security integrated into our pipelines that we get back 4 different types of tests. The first, which is my favorite, is just regular old automated testing. And this is things like basic stuff, which I think is typically exploited more often by bad actors. And these are things like, hey, I'm paying for this patent. Let me make sure that I'm not paying for the wrong patent. Hey, I've got this credit card stored. Let me make sure that a different person can't use my credit card. Let me make sure that the thing I added to the cart can't be added to someone that doesn't have access to view the shopping cart. I think sometimes people forget about that sort of basic stuff. That to me is very, very important on security. That's number one. Number two, we do static analysis, right? These are like OWASP top 10 type stuff of the actual source code. Number three is that we're doing real-time dynamic scans. Like this is, again, OWASP top 10, but this is running constantly after every commit, after every deployment to every environment so that we get fast feedback. And then the fourth, which is relatively new for us, is we're doing open source supply chain analysis, right? So these are anything, any component that's included in, any open source component that's included in sort of your bill of software materials, right? Like, so this would be if you're using Spring or Struts or Hibernate, all of that stuff is scanned. We use Java, so inside the PALM file to tell you, hey, there's actually a newer version of Hibernate that you could use, right? And this is all happening within minutes or seconds instead of days, weeks, or months. So even though it's large, it's real fast, and we care a lot about security, and we want that information like real time. Sorry, I'm done.
No, you're good. And it's super helpful. I really appreciate
I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, and I appreciate that this panel is filled with it just really demonstrates how in each agency it's a very different sort of experience and kind of perspective with some of this. We have one more question for Stephanie from FAA. Is your pre-prod environment for UAT by customers?
It is not. It is for our pre-prod deployment services team to say you can deploy to production. That is what it's for. They do a check to make sure that they want an environment that they can say 100% mirrors production, and they want you to deploy to that environment first, and then they will deploy it to prod. So, we can't deploy to pre-prod either. So, but I get it when we were in a data center environment. I don't get it now. I get it when we were not in but in a manual deployment environment. I don't get it now. So, but we have that argument going back.
A follow-up on that just came through. So customers, do they test before it is deployed?
Oh, absolutely. So we have dev, we have test, we can even have a staging if necessary. In a DevOps environment, I don't think we need all these tiers, right? But pre-prod is when you're ready to go to production, you go to deployment support services and they say, okay, well, tell us where your repo is and we'll deploy to pre-prod and then we'll deploy to prod. That's what it is.
That's great.
So,
thank you so much for
sharing.
You're right. Thank you for sharing your.
It is what it is.
I see that we have about 5 minutes left. We covered the audience questions. The last thing I have, if anyone would want to share, we kind of touched on it earlier. Hesitant to use the term silver linings, but is there anything that you guys have experienced in the last several months in this new pandemic-induced reality that you hope to see carry on or go beyond? I'd like to end on a happy note here. So is there anything that you guys would like to share that you'd like to see carry over?
This is Raven. The Smithsonian had a thing called the Random Act of Coffee. And somebody had all of the employees that were interested sign up, and they chose 4 names out of a hat. And they put you all together, and you were responsible for getting together whenever you wanted to get together. So the other 3 people that we got together via Zoom, which was, or MS, I don't know, Zoom or Teams, and didn't know them before. And as far as I knew, I had the best job ever in the world, and nobody could say anything different or tell me anything different. And these other 3 people feel they have the best job ever. One's works with the new dinosaur hall. He wanted to be a paleontologist since he was 4, so now he gets to work with that. Another she works in education with this new department for digital education, since we're all going digital in the Smithsonian. And another person, even though she's in HR, it's not really what she had wanted to do with her life, but she really likes it. So I like natural history, American, like all of these other different units for people who think they have the best job ever in the Smithsonian. And I would love everybody to work there because it's such a great place to work. So if there is going to be a silver lining, you get to meet other people in your organization that this is awesome. Like, we work for a really great organization. So that's my little positive spin.
That's great. And I love the idea of, in kind of where there's disparate groups, bringing people together like never before. That's awesome. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Jennifer. I think for me, being so new to the organization, all of a sudden being in, sort of seeing pieces of my team's homes and getting to meet their children or hear their dog bark or watch their cat walk across the webcam. It's really just been interesting just to learn more about who they are and the challenges they're facing and how they're getting through things. It's really just given me a deeper appreciation for just how hard everyone is working right now to make these situations work.
That's incredible. Alrighty, it looks like we have about 1 minute left, but I'm going to go ahead and call it. I think this was a great panel, and I really appreciate all of your insights and different perspectives from your experiences. Just a note for our audience, I believe there's going to be a video right after this, so do stay tuned, and thank you so much for joining us for today's conference and panel. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tom Suter. I'm the founder of the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and I am here with Jeff Bride, Domain Architect over at Red Hat. How are you doing today, Jeff?
I am well. Thank you, Tom. How are you?
Good, good. And where are you out of today?
I'm based out of Denver, Colorado. I've been here for about 20 years. Beautiful place to live.
Yeah, fantastic. I love visiting out there. Looking forward to your presentation today. I think it's very, very timely with what's going on, and I will turn it over to you.
Sounds good. So thank you so much for allowing me to spend some time with you today talking about what Red Hat calls the power of communities. And being that we're Red Hat, this is often in reference to the power of open source communities and the innovation that comes about through open source collaborative mechanisms. And so we're going to talk about power communities through the lens of a business application demo that Red Hat created several years ago called the Emergency Response Demo. So the Emergency Response Demo it was inspired by an event that took place several years ago, in particular back in 2017. If you recall, off the coast of Texas, Hurricane Harvey hit and caused immense damage, unfortunately. So one of the things that came about out of this disaster, however, was the response of community members to help out their neighbors. So you can imagine after the course of a hurricane such as Harvey, you're going to have folks that are in desperate need of medical attention. They're going to need shelter. They're going to need food and water, so on and so forth. On the other hand, there were community members who were in a little bit better position coming out of it, and they may have had the logistical means to help out their neighbors. And so they may have had boats and medical supplies. And so we were really inspired by this, and we thought about creating a demonstration that basically simulated this responsiveness and this voluntary community action to assist neighbors. So let's get on with the demo. So I'm going to break out of my presentation, and I'm going to log into the web console of the emergency response demo, and I'm going to do so using a user that we refer to as the incident commander. And one of the things you're going to notice as my web page pops up is that we've been redirected to what we call the dashboard. The dashboard is a series of panels that are providing situational awareness to the state of the recovery process after the aftermath of a hurricane. We happen to be focused in on Wilmington, North Carolina. In the top left panel, you'll see that at this point in time, I've got probably, about 150 incidents where evacuees or neighbors who are in need of help have communicated that they need that assistance. On the right-hand panel, top right-hand panel, you can see that I've got a total of 5 responders thus far, hopefully more, that would be in a position to help out. And so we're working on evacuating those in need and taking them to shelters. The bottom map depicts what's going on in real time in our simulated world of this disaster having hit Wilmington, North Carolina. You see lots of different incidents that are on the map. And to this point, I just want to touch upon several of the technologies that are being used here. So this is a JavaScript web application that is consuming events in real time from the 15 back-end business services that make up the emergency response demo. These 15 back-end business services are communicating with each other through a messaging system that it's a messaging broker that allows these various services to consume and produce events. So in this sense, this emergency response demo is architected in an event-driven architecture. The reason we do this is to provide horizontal scalability and increase throughput and performance to our business application. Event-driven architectures are applicable in so many different use cases, not just in emergency response. I also want to point out that the architecture of the demo is such that it's designed in a microservice manner. So each one of these 15 back-end business services operates in their own life cycle following continuous integration and delivery principles. Okay, so we saw that we can see here in real time that the map is changing state. And let's dig into one of the incidents itself. So I'll pick this one here. And you'll notice that I have here quite a bit of information associated with this incident. There's a corresponding what we call mission. It's giving me the location in terms of longitude and latitude of the evacuee who's in need of assistance, the name of that evacuee, whether that evacuee needs medical attention, and the number of people that need to be rescued. In this case, Nora Brooks has 2 other folks that need assistance. Now, this link here to a process diagram, let's drill into that. So this is a depiction of this is a process definition created via tooling that Red Hat provides as part of its business automation portfolio. And so this process definition was previously written in a collaborative manner between a business owner. So in this case, it would be somebody who's familiar with emergency response, maybe the mission commander, let's say, along with a software developer. So in a collaborative manner, they came up with this use case and this flow. And this flow is actually dictating the interaction of all of the 15 other business process services. So we say that this is microservice orchestration. Now, this diagram looks like something you could have created in UML or something with like a tool like Visio. But unlike Visio, this drawing gets compiled. And the compiled representation of this drawing is actually what's used at runtime to drive that microservice orchestration. Right? So it's extremely powerful in terms of the visibility and the collaboration that it provides, and the fact that it's actually the runtime that's being used. The last thing I want to point out in this process definition is that what we're looking at here is the actual state of this particular mission at this particular point in time. So you can see that we've flown from our start node all the way through into what we call a sub-process. And in this particular mission, for this particular incident, we're waiting for an external system to send some message to this process to reawaken and move on to the next task in the process. Okay, going back to the emergency console. The next thing I'd like to show you is the mission tab. And this is where the demo actually becomes interactive. So what you were previously seeing is simulated responders, but in this case, I'm going to serve as a responder to be assigned to an incident. So I go to the mission tab here. I'm already logged in, and I'm just going to click somewhere on the map, let's say, indicating that I'm available. And soon enough, what's happened is that I have been assigned an incident, and the map is depicting that. So a few things that I want to point out is that this incident assignment happened through a series of business rules that were executed. Business rule technology is also part of that business automation tooling that I was previously talking about. And so these business rules operated on a variety of different variables to determine which evacuee is the best match for me as the responder. So those variables that took in consideration were the location of the evacuee, my location at my start point, where the shelter is, along with the number of people that are in need of evacuation, whether there's anybody within the evacuation party that needs any medical attention, so on and so forth. All those business rules executed and defined this mission for me. You can see that here I am simulating the move to a pickup point, and soon enough I will get to my pickup point, and at that point in time that would indicate that I've arrived. I'm going to go ahead and pick up the evacuees, and then I'm going to take them on to the shelter. So I haven't quite made it there. I'm just about to get there, but you can imagine what's going to happen. As soon as I get there, I'll click on picked up, and then we'll move on to the shelter, and the mission will be completed. So give it a second here, and we would have picked up. So there we go. All right. So now this is indicating to the variety of different 15 business services on the back end that we're now on our way to the shelter, which would be the end state of the mission. So that is the demo. Now, I was mentioning that this is architected in a microservice manner, an event-driven manner as well. And so one thing I want to point out that when we talk about microservice architectures, there's a huge amount of value add in terms of business agility that it brings. But you really can't talk about microservice architectures without having appreciation for the metrics that are needed to provide visibility in terms of all the interactions of these various services. So what comes out of the box with the infrastructure that we're using here, called OpenShift, for the emergency response demo, are operational and business dashboards, and that's what you're seeing here through a technology called Grafana. So if I click on one of these dashboards, this one's called the Emergency Response Dashboard. What you can see here are real-time metrics of the health of all of my different microservices that are part of the emergency response demo. Super critical to understand what's going on from an operational perspective and to be able to troubleshoot in real time if and when problems arise. Related, I also want to point out that we have a different type of dashboard, and this is going to be more appropriate for business users. So we have the ability to provide, let's say, the incident commander with a real-time holistic view of what's going on with this particular disaster scenario. You can see I have updates on the number of total rescued thus far, who are the top rescuers in terms of their speed and performance and their ability to to take their neighbors to shelter, so on and so forth. So all this provides the operational commander with valuable situational awareness. So that is the demo, and let me go back to my slide presentation to just make a few other last minute comments here. So this technology that we've used for the emergency response demo, along with the architectural principles that we've talked about, are applicable in so many different businesses. And in that manner, we've been implementing business use cases for both public and private sectors for a long time. And we typically categorize those business processes that we see our customers implement in these three different buckets. The first one being straight through. This is what you saw in the emergency response demo. You have a process definition that is fairly static and it's able to be automated. Building off of that is human intensive types of business processes where you have a business process, it's static, but you also have the need for a knowledge worker to impute value on that business process from time to time. And then case management builds off of the other two. And this is where you have a need for an ad hoc business process where at authoring time, you don't exactly know exactly what the flow of the business process is going to be. So you need a capability that can adjust in real time. All of these workloads that I've discussed, not only in the previous slide, but as you've seen in the emergency response demo, are implemented and have been implemented through Red Hat's application services portfolio, consisting of runtimes, integration, and process automation, running as a first-class citizen on our Kubernetes, our supported Kubernetes distribution called OpenShift. Now, one thing that I just want to point out real quick is the integration portfolio. This is where all of the tooling exists that will help you integrate with all of your back-end business services and your legacy systems. Now, we've talked about the emergency response demo. We've talked about the architectures that were used and the tooling that was used, the cloud native approach to all of this. All of this is applicable not just for emergency response, but all kinds of different use cases that exist in government organizations. And so I encourage you to reach out to us, please, at Red Hat to find out how your use cases, your business use cases can be implemented using the same principles and the same technologies. And with that, Tom, thank you so much for allowing me to present on the power of communities from the perspective of Red Hat.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I really enjoyed that presentation. It's not often you see something that's actually built to save lives. Appreciated that very much.
Nice.
So that was Jeff Bride, domain architect over at Red Hat. And now we'll turn to the rest of the program.